Hey guys, today we're back with another video on things you should never do to your fish tank, or as a fish keeper, or in the hobby, however you want to think of it. We got to give a shout out to all the subs that helped build this list down in the comments. These were things that I cherry picked from you guys and was like, oh, that's totally something that I've done before, and you're right. So thank you very much. Let's start out with the first thing you should never do to your fish tank, and that is don't fill it up too much. This might sound super obvious, right? But it's something that, especially on small tanks, you can do and have it be a little bit of an issue, right? I personally love to fill my fish tanks up as high as I can. I'm constantly topping them off little by little to keep them as high as possible. You can see here on these tanks that are behind me, these are actually a little bit lower than I'd like. I'd like them a little bit higher. This poses a problem because if you fill a tank up like this, especially a small one, when you go to do any kind of work in it, put your hand in it for whatever reason, then you're likely to get an overflow, which spilling water on the floor is never something that we want to do. Bigger tanks, you don't really have to worry about it because your arm isn't enough to displace water up out of the tank. Small tanks, keep your eye out on it. If you're gonna fill them up really high, then just don't put anything in it. The second thing that you should never do is forget that you're feeding a frozen food. And what I mean specifically by this is like your frozen bloodworms, right? So when you go to grab them out of the freezer, you need to thaw them out a little bit. A lot of fish, they don't like to pick at the frozen stuff. Some fish do, but you know what I mean. So what do? You put your frozen bloodworms in like a little cup, just a couple ounces of water, and then you let it sit to thaw out, right? Well, this is something that used to happen to me all the time back at my old place when I had the tanks in the garage. I would take a little cup of warm tank water, let the frozen bloodworms sit in there, and then feed them to the tank in, a couple minutes. But obviously what can happen is you forget, right? Like when you're doing a water change, you forget about that, bad things happen. Same thing can happen with the frozen food. So for me personally, it would be coming out into the garage a few days after attempting to feed my tank and starting to notice the stench of death. And that is, of course, something that you don't want to have happen. You don't want any space in your house to smell like death. And sometimes it can be hard to figure out where it's coming from. So that's what happens to frozen food when you forget about it. Don't leave your stuff out. Remember to put it in the tank. And you don't want to feed that rancid sitting bloodworms for 3 days cup into your tank. Nobody's gonna like that. So you just lose out on that meal for the fish. The third thing you should never do as somebody who is into fish tanks is not have any really cool fish stickers. I recently debuted the new fish stickers that we're selling on the website, guys, in the last video. Unfortunately, I uploaded that and then like an hour later, YouTube decided to just completely be crashed for a period of time. I don't know if you guys remember that or experienced that, but it was kind of weird. So anyway, if you're interested in the fish stickers, you're seeing some of them here now. There's more stuff coming in. We have the larger 5-inch versions of all these stickers, as well as the magnets, and we're working on some vinyl films, these like clingy things that you can actually put on glass, so your tank or your, the back of your car window or whatever. This is part of an effort to further support this channel, and I really appreciate you guys being involved with that. So check it out, link in the description, and let me know what you think of the stickers. The fourth thing that you should never do if you're somebody who's keeping a fish tank and you like everything to be very precise, you want it the way that you have it, don't make the mistake of letting a snail or two hang out in there when you don't want them. This is simply because snails, even though there's a couple of them, will repopulate in mass numbers. This is especially true for the common snails like the ram's horns, the bladder snails, the assassin snails. They're gonna multiply like crazy, and it will become pretty much impossible to get rid of them if you don't want them in your tank. So be careful when you're adding stuff like new plants into an aquarium, or even if you're going from one tank to another, sometimes a snail can hitch a ride on your hand. You might not even notice it, especially if you have tanks right next to each other. I think you get the point. because plants are such an easy way to transfer something like snails or algae into a different aquarium, there are techniques to prevent that, such as the bleach dip. I don't always recommend that. Some people seem to think that that's really an outrageous thing to do. You can do it safely, but I'm not going to recommend that here because we're not talking about exactly how to do it. But just know that you can research ways to prevent nuisance pests from going from one tank to another if they're on plants and other scaping materials or whatever you're going from one tank to another. Always remember to wash your hands if you're going to be going from tank to tank and you are somebody that's really cautious about these things. Number 5 is never let an inexperienced fish keeper or person with fish tanks take care of your fish tanks with you not there. Basically what I'm saying is that if you're gonna leave and have somebody take care of your tanks over vacation, make sure you have detailed instructions of what to do, how much food, what tanks, exactly written out perfectly so that they don't accidentally cause a problem. This can be a really tough thing to do because you don't want to be overbearing on somebody. Like, I totally get all the reasons of why you'd just be like, all right, this person's got this, but don't be naive to that. Really simple mistakes can happen. I'll give you an example. I had my dad take care of a fish tank when I was gone for like a week, and while I don't know it 1000% sure, right, I'm pretty sure he just overfed the crap out of the tank and we lost some fish due to an ammonia spike, right? So I don't know that for sure, but I know if you're somebody that is on the other side of this and you're like, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about, just make sure that the instructions you lay out are very precise down to the exact amount of food. Maybe try taking a pinch of food and putting it down on the table as a reference point for how much that tank should get, or what have you, and that can help out a lot. If you have the ability to show them in person how to do it, I think that's the best, but just be very mindful of who's taking care of your tanks, even if they are somebody that you trust. If they're not into fish tanks, then a lot of the times you could have some problems. Number 6, guys, is never put a random piece of wood into an aquarium. There's a lot of methods for using natural materials. You can use river rocks, you can use natural wood in an aquarium. There's plenty of examples of people doing that for forever, right? But the problem is, I think, is people, especially when they're new, they get confused over what type of wood or rock is suitable for an aquarium. So what I mean by this is, like, they might assume that driftwood from the beach might be a good option. What's the difference between that and some wood that's decaying and hanging out in a river, right? It's in a river. It makes sense that it should work in a fish tank. And then there's, of course, like just terrestrial wood that's way far away from any water source. How come you can't use that? There's a lot of reasons for why wood that you find out in nature might be a bad idea to put in your aquarium. If you're talking about wood that is far away from a water source, it might have sap and other things in there that aren't going to be good for your inhabitants. You can do things like boil that out and do all this work, but in my experience, at the end of the day, you're always just better off buying wood that's prepped and ready to go for your fish tank. There's always the concept of take whatever you're gonna put and boil it. That way it sterilizes it and it's good for your tank. I have a few different problems with that. One being, I don't think there's a huge risk, especially if you're like in North America, introducing fishborne disease into your tank that way. And then of course, there's also the fact that you're not technically sterilizing it, you're just sanitizing it. There's certain things that boiling does not kill. And I think for the most part, if you're gonna take stuff out of nature, if it's not a rock, rocks are pretty safe. But if it's wood, you want to be careful. You don't want something that's going to be degrading a lot in the water if it's not a cured piece of wood or a certain type, like a manzanita, right? That's harder and doesn't have a lot to shed off as far as decay goes. So that's, again, why I recommend you guys just stick with the woods that are available for tanks that you can buy from stores. And with that said, I think that's it for today's list, guys. 6 things that you should never do to your fish tank or as a fish keeper or whatever. Thank you very much for helping me. Everybody that dropped comments related to these things, that helped out a ton. If you have some new ones, if you want to contribute to maybe a 3rd video, I don't know if there's going to be enough, but there probably is. So let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for checking out the stickers, guys, and be on the lookout for new products that are coming out, because I'm really ramping up on that. The response so far has been really good. So thank you very much. Check that out and get some more info on it. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.